Have you ever looked at your aloe vera and wondered why it just doesn't look right? Maybe the leaves are curling in on themselves. Maybe they've gone soft and a little see-through. Maybe the whole plant looks pale and stretched out like it's reaching for something it can't quite find. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Aloe vera is one of the toughest, most forgiving plants on earth, and yet so many people still manage to slowly kill it without ever realizing what they're doing wrong. It's not because they don't care. It's because a handful of small, everyday habits are working against the plant instead of with it. And today, we're going to go through 9 of those mistakes, one by one, so you can figure out exactly which ones might be happening in your own home right now. Mistake number 7 on this list is the one I see mentioned in the comments more than almost any other, and it might surprise you how simple the fix actually is. So stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to look at your aloe vera completely differently. Welcome back to Golden Vault Garden, where we help you grow healthier, happier plants without the stress and without the guesswork. Let's get into it. Mistake number 1. Watering on a fixed schedule instead of checking the soil. This is probably the single most common habit that quietly destroys aloe vera plants everywhere, and it usually comes from good intentions. People want to be consistent. They want to take care of their plant the right way, so they decide, I'll water it every Sunday, or I'll water it every Wednesday evening after work. It feels responsible. It feels like a routine you can trust. The problem is that aloe vera doesn't care what day of the week it is. It cares about moisture, and moisture depends on so many things that have nothing to do with your calendar. The temperature in your home, the amount of sunlight the plant gets, the size of the pot, the type of soil, even the humidity in the air. All of these change how quickly the soil dries out. So when you water on autopilot, you end up giving your aloe way more water than it actually needs, especially during cooler months when it barely needs any water at all. What happens next is a slow, quiet disaster. The roots sit in damp soil for days longer than they should. Oxygen gets pushed out of the soil. Fungus and bacteria that cause root rot start to multiply. And by the time you notice something is wrong, the damage below the surface is often already serious. The warning signs to watch for are leaves that feel unusually soft or mushy, a base of the plant that looks darker than normal, and in bad cases, a faint sour smell coming from the soil. The fix is refreshingly simple. Stop watering by the calendar and start watering by touch. Push your finger about 2 inches into the soil. If it still feels even slightly cool or damp, wait. Aloe vera would honestly rather you forget about it for an extra week than get watered too soon. Once you switch to this habit, you'll notice your plant becomes noticeably firmer and more resilient within just a few weeks. I remember when I first started growing aloe vera myself, I kept a little watering reminder on my phone. Every Saturday morning, water the plants. It felt organized. It felt like I had a system. But my aloe vera didn't agree with my system at all. Within 2 months, the lower leaves had turned soft and slightly yellow, and I couldn't figure out why, since I was being so consistent. It wasn't until I finally pulled the plant out of its pot and saw the dark, mushy roots that it clicked. Consistency isn't always a good thing if you're being consistently wrong. The moment I switched to checking the soil with my finger instead of my calendar, everything changed. Some weeks I went 10 days between waterings. Other weeks, especially in winter, I went almost a full month. My aloe has never looked better since. But even if you fix your watering habits completely, you can still lose your aloe vera without ever touching the watering can too often. Which brings us to mistake number 2, choosing a pretty pot with no drainage hole. We've all done this. You're at the store, you see a gorgeous ceramic pot. Maybe it's got a beautiful glaze or an interesting shape, and you think, that would look perfect with my aloe vera. Nowhere on the price tag does it mention whether there's a drainage hole, and honestly, most of us don't think to check. Here's why that matters so much. Aloe vera evolved in dry, rocky environments where water disappears almost as fast as it falls. Its roots are built to experience short bursts of moisture, followed by long stretches of dryness. When you plant it in a container with no way for excess water to escape, every single watering turns into a small flood that has nowhere to go. The water just sits at the bottom of the pot, and the roots that happen to be closest to it start to suffocate and rot. Even if you're careful with how much you pour in, there's no way to control what happens once it's trapped inside. The telltale signs of this mistake are leaves that go limp and lose their firmness even though you haven't overwatered recently, a musty smell near the base, and roots that come out black or brown and mushy if you ever check them. I actually watched this happen to a subscriber who messaged me a few months back. She'd bought a stunning hand-painted pot for her mother's aloe vera, no drainage hole in sight, and kept watering it lightly every week because the top of the soil always looked dry. By the time she got worried enough to check, the bottom 2 inches of that pot were basically a swamp, and when she finally tipped the plant out, the roots had turned to black mush that came apart in her hands like wet paper. She lost the whole plant except for one small pup she managed to save and start over with. That's the cruel part of this mistake. Everything looks fine on the surface right up until it doesn't. The fix here isn't complicated, but it does require a little bit of discipline. If you love a pot without drainage, use it as a decorative outer sleeve, and keep your aloe in a plain plastic nursery pot with several holes on the inside. That way you get the look you want without sacrificing the plant's health. If you already have your aloe planted directly into a pot with no drainage, it's worth taking the time to drill a few holes into the bottom, or better yet, repot it into something that was designed to breathe. And here's a small bonus tip while we're on the subject of pots. Size matters too. Aloe vera actually prefers to be slightly snug in its container, rather than swimming in a pot that's far too large. A pot that's only about 1 to 2 inches wider than the root ball is usually ideal. When the pot is oversized, the soil holds onto moisture for far longer than the roots can use it, which brings us right back to the same rotting problem we just talked about, even if the drainage holes are perfect. Once your aloe is finally sitting in a pot that actually lets it breathe, the next thing that quietly works against it is where you've placed it in the room, which brings us to mistake number 3, keeping your aloe vera somewhere too dark. So many people believe aloe vera is a low-light plant because it's tough and doesn't die right away in a dim corner. But surviving and thriving are two very different things. Aloe vera actually wants a good 6 hours or more of bright, indirect sunlight every single day. Without that, it doesn't just sit there patiently waiting. It changes shape. The stem starts to stretch upward, leaning toward whatever light source it can find. The leaves grow thinner, paler, and further apart than they should be. This stretching process is called etiolation, and once it happens, the plant never really goes back to its original compact, healthy shape, even if you move it to better light afterward. You can only grow new, healthy leaves going forward. The early signs are subtle. The newest leaves look noticeably lighter green than the older ones. The plant seems to be leaning or growing sideways, and the overall shape starts to look tall and floppy instead of full and sturdy. The fix is simply giving it a brighter home. A spot near an east-facing or south-facing window usually works beautifully. If your home doesn't have great natural light, a simple, inexpensive grow light on a timer for around 12 hours a day can completely change the plant's growth pattern within a month or two. One thing to be careful of though, don't rush a plant that's been living in low light straight into hours of intense afternoon sun. Ease it in gradually over a week or two so the leaves have time to adjust. Otherwise, you risk scorching them. I've actually seen this happen with viewers who wrote in after watching one of my earlier videos. They realized their aloe had been sitting in a dim hallway for months, felt determined to fix it immediately, and moved it straight onto a sun-drenched patio the very next afternoon. Within a day, the leaves had white, papery patches where the tissue had essentially been sunburned. The lesson isn't that bright light is bad. It's that any big change, even a good one, needs to be introduced gradually so the plant has time to build up its tolerance. Even with perfect light streaming in, your aloe can still struggle if its roots are sitting in the wrong material, which is exactly why mistake number 4 is using heavy, moisture-holding potting soil. This one goes hand in hand with the watering mistake we already talked about, but it deserves its own spot on the list because it's just as damaging on its own. Standard potting mixes are formulated to hold on to water for a long time. That's exactly what a fern or a tropical houseplant wants. It is the opposite of what aloe vera wants. When you plant aloe in regular potting soil, even if you're careful about how often you water, the soil itself stays damp for far longer than the roots can tolerate. It's a bit like wearing a wet sock all day. Eventually, no matter how tough your skin is, something starts to break down. The roots need quick drainage and plenty of airflow between waterings, and dense potting soil simply doesn't allow for that. Signs that your soil might be the culprit include soil that still feels damp 2 or 3 days after watering, a heavy, compacted texture when you touch it, and leaves that look swollen or waterlogged rather than plump and firm. The solution is switching to a fast-draining mix. You can buy a cactus or succulent blend at almost any garden center, or you can make your own by combining regular potting soil with perlite and coarse sand in roughly equal parts. This creates a light, airy texture that lets water pass through quickly while still giving the roots something to hold on to. If your aloe has been struggling for a while, and you suspect the soil is part of the problem, it's worth repotting into a proper mix, even outside of the usual repotting season, since dense wet soil can cause damage far faster than a stressful repot ever would. Now let's talk about a mistake that almost always happens right after you've done everything else correctly. Mistake number 5. Watering immediately after repotting. This mistake feels completely counterintuitive, which is exactly why so many people fall into it. You just repotted your aloe, the roots look a little disturbed, and your instinct says, it probably needs a good drink to help it settle in. Unfortunately, that instinct is working against you here. When you repot aloe vera, especially if you trimmed any damaged or rotten roots, those roots have small open wounds, even if you can't see them clearly. Watering right away introduces moisture directly to those fresh cuts, which creates the perfect environment for bacteria and fungus to move in before the wounds have had any chance to heal. The result can be root rot that sets in within days of an otherwise healthy repotting. The signs to watch for after a repot are leaves that go soft or discolored within the first week, and a base that looks darker or feels squishy to the touch. The fix is patience. After repotting, let your aloe sit completely dry for about 5 to 7 days. This gives the cut ends of the roots time to callus over, forming a natural protective barrier before they're exposed to moisture again. I know it feels wrong to leave a freshly potted plant bone dry, but trust the process. Succulents like aloe vera have evolved to handle exactly this kind of stress, as long as you give them the time they need. Once your aloe has settled into its new pot and soil, the next thing you need to watch is the air around it. Because mistake number 6 is exposing your aloe to cold drafts or sudden temperature swings. Aloe vera is comfortable in a fairly wide range of temperatures, generally somewhere between 65 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit, but it does not handle sudden shocks well at all. A lot of people place their aloe near a window without thinking about what happens on the other side of that glass. During colder months, a windowsill can get surprisingly cold at night, even if the room itself feels comfortable. The same goes for placing your aloe too close to an air conditioning vent, a drafty door, or even a spot that gets blasted by dry heat from a nearby radiator. Aloe vera doesn't just dislike extreme cold or extreme heat, it dislikes the constant back and forth between temperatures far more than a steady, moderate environment. Watch for leaves that suddenly turn brown or almost translucent looking after a cold night, tips that dry out and crisp up near a heating vent, and an overall look of stress that seems to appear out of nowhere with no change in watering. The fix is all about placement. Keep your aloe a comfortable distance away from exterior doors, drafty windows, heating vents, and air conditioning units. If you keep your aloe outside during the warmer months, which it genuinely loves, make sure you bring it indoors well before the first cold night of the fall, since even one unexpected frost can undo months of healthy growth. It's also worth thinking about airflow along with temperature. A completely sealed, stagnant room, even one that's perfectly warm, allows moisture to linger in the soil longer than it should, which quietly increases the risk of fungal problems and pests like mealybugs. Cracking a window occasionally, or simply running a ceiling fan on its lowest setting, helps the soil dry evenly and keeps the whole environment healthier for your plant. If you want to catch every single one of these problems before they get serious, you have to learn to actually read your plant. Which brings us to mistake number 7, and this is the one I mentioned at the very beginning, ignoring the early warning signs until it's almost too late. Aloe vera actually communicates quite clearly when something is wrong, but most of us aren't taught how to read the signals until after the damage is already done. The plant doesn't just collapse overnight. It gives you small hints for days or even weeks before a real crisis develops. And if you catch those hints early, you can usually turn things around without losing a single leaf. The trouble is that a lot of these early signs look almost identical to each other at first glance, so people either ignore them completely or misread what the plant is actually asking for. Wrinkled or slightly deflated leaves usually mean the plant is thirsty and simply needs a good, thorough watering soon. Leaves that are soft, mushy, or starting to look a little translucent almost always point to the opposite problem: too much water sitting around the roots. Yellowing that starts from the base of the plant and slowly works its way up often signals either old age in the lower leaves, which is completely normal, or chronic overwatering, which is not. And leaves that are turning brown specifically at the very tips are usually telling you something about fertilizer buildup, low humidity, or occasionally sun damage rather than a watering issue at all. The mistake most people make is treating every single symptom as the same problem and reaching for the watering can no matter what they see. when really, the color and texture of the leaf is the plant's own way of narrowing down exactly what's going on. The fix here is simply to slow down and actually look at your aloe vera every few days instead of only checking on it once a month. Get to know what healthy growth looks like for your specific plant in your specific environment, the natural color, the firmness, the way the leaves sit. Once you have that baseline, any small deviation becomes obvious almost immediately, and you can adjust your care before a minor issue ever turns into a plant emergency. Catching these signals early is honestly the difference between a 5-minute fix and a full repotting with trimmed, rotted roots weeks later. Once you're paying close attention to your aloe, it's tempting to want to help it along even more, and that's exactly how people stumble into mistake number 8, the one so many of you have asked about in the comments: over-fertilizing your aloe vera. There's a common belief that if a little fertilizer helps a plant grow, then more fertilizer must help it grow even faster. With aloe vera, that thinking backfires badly. Aloe is a slow-growing, low-nutrient succulent by nature. It survives in poor, rocky soil in the wild, and it simply isn't built to process large amounts of fertilizer. When you feed it too often or use a fertilizer that's too strong, salts start to build up in the soil. Those salts pull moisture directly out of the roots, which is almost the opposite effect of what you were trying to achieve. The plant essentially becomes dehydrated even though the soil might still be damp. The warning signs of over-fertilizing include leaf tips that turn brown and crispy despite regular watering, a white or crusty buildup on the surface of the soil or around the drainage holes, and roots that look burned or blackened if you check them. The fix is to feed sparingly. A diluted, balanced fertilizer once every couple of months during the spring and summer growing season is usually more than enough. During fall and winter, when the plant naturally slows down, skip fertilizing altogether. If you suspect you've already overdone it, flushing the soil with several rounds of plain water can help wash out excess salts and give the roots a chance to recover. A good rule to keep in the back of your mind is that with aloe vera, less is almost always more when it comes to feeding. If you're ever unsure whether to fertilize, it's usually safer to skip it for another month than to risk burning the roots with too much of a good thing. Finally, once your aloe is healthy enough to actually reward you, the last way people undo all that hard work is mistake number 9. Harvesting the leaves the wrong way. So many people grow aloe vera specifically for its soothing gel, and that's a wonderful reason to grow it, but harvesting incorrectly can genuinely hurt the plant over time. A common mistake is cutting leaves from the center of the plant rather than the outer edges. The inner, younger leaves are still developing and are essential to the plant's ongoing growth. Removing them slows the entire plant down significantly. Another mistake is harvesting far too many leaves at once, which leaves the plant without enough foliage to photosynthesize properly, essentially starving it of energy right when it needs to recover. And a smaller but still important mistake is tearing the leaf away instead of cutting it cleanly, which creates a jagged wound that takes much longer to heal and is far more vulnerable to infection. Signs that you've been harvesting too aggressively include a noticeably smaller, thinner-looking plant after a harvest, slow or stalled new growth for weeks afterward, and open wounds near the base that seem to stay wet or discolored longer than they should. The fix is to only harvest a leaf or two at a time from the mature outer ring of the plant, always leaving at least half of the leaves untouched. Use a clean, sharp knife to make one smooth cut as close to the base as possible, and let your aloe rest for several weeks between harvests, so it has time to fully recover before you take from it again. Before we wrap things up, if you've realized you've been making one or two of these mistakes yourself, don't feel bad about it. Almost every single person who has ever grown aloe vera has made at least a few of them, myself included. The good news is that aloe vera is remarkably forgiving. Fix even one or two of these habits, and you'll usually start seeing improvement within just a few weeks. If this video helped you spot something you didn't realize you were doing, do me a favor and tap that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more gardeners who are trying to figure out exactly the same things you were. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Golden Vault Garden. We put out practical, no-nonsense gardening advice designed to help your plants actually thrive, not just survive. I'd also love to know down in the comments which of these 9 mistakes hit closest to home for you, or if there's an aloe vera problem we didn't cover here that you're still trying to figure out. I read through every comment, and sometimes the questions you ask end up becoming entire future videos. So let's do a quick recap before we go. Mistake 1. Watering on a fixed schedule instead of checking the soil. Mistake 2. Using a pot with no drainage. Mistake 3. Keeping your aloe somewhere too dark. Mistake 4. planting it in heavy, moisture-holding soil. Mistake 5. Watering right after repotting. Mistake 6. Exposing it to cold drafts or sudden temperature swings. Mistake 7. Ignoring early warning signs like wrinkled, soft, yellow, or browning leaves until it's almost too late. Mistake 8. Over-fertilizing. And mistake 9. Harvesting the leaves the wrong way. Aloe vera doesn't ask for much. Bright light, infrequent but thorough watering, fast-draining soil, and a little patience. Give it those 4 things consistently, and it will reward you for years with thick, healthy leaves, adorable little pups, and soothing gel whenever you need it. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I really do appreciate every single one of you who watches these videos all the way through. Now go take a look at your own aloe vera with fresh eyes, and see if any of these 9 mistakes are quietly holding it back. Until next time, this is Golden Vault Garden, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy growing!